Well, okay, welcome everyone to the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. I'm really excited to have several students from Clark Atlanta University who will be talking about student voter engagement activities as it relates to the general election, the runoff election, and even thinking toward the future. How can we, as a campus of students, encourage student voter engagement and student civic engagement? Because I think it's an important issue, and it's an important concern that we should focus on. And so I'm excited to have three students from Clark Atlanta University who are extremely active on the scene of supporting broader initiatives to get students involved. So we have representatives. So what we did was we have several students who are serving as ambassadors for various organizations, national organizations, and regional partnerships. And so we have representatives from the Andrew Goodman Foundation, the HBCU cohort ambassadors. So wave your hand if you're an HBCU. All right. And so that's you too, Janae. And then we also have representatives from Campus Vote Project, the Democracy Ambassadors. And then we also have students who work with us during the CAU Votes, which is kind of the umbrella activity for everything that we've done. AUC Votes, which is a part of our Atlanta University collaborative. And so just in terms of providing a well-rounded perspective on what we did in the Atlanta University Center, but what we did at Clark Atlanta University, and what we're continuing to do in order to support student voter and student civic engagement. So I have Christina Williams, who is a junior political science major, and we also have Miss Janiyah Henry, who is a freshman political science major, and then we have Elisha Aziz, who is a sophomore, junior. Yeah, I think junior
criminal justice.
Junior, I know criminal justice, junior criminal justice major. And so one of the things I will say is that they are just very active in their own right, and they are involved in other organizations that I'm sure that they'll tell you about. So I'm going to ask them a series of questions, and they will provide feedback, and we'll just go around in a roundtable conversation, just gaining insight into their perspectives and their activism. So I want to know, and I'll start with Christina, and then I will go in the way that I've introduced them, in terms of how did you become politically active on campus, and why is civic and voter engagement important to you?
Okay. So I think that my very first experience being politically engaged on campus was actually running for office on campus through student government. My freshman year, probably 2 or 3 weeks after school started, didn't know anyone, didn't know anything. I ran for freshman class vice president, and I was able to win that. And I think that really piqued my interest in getting more involved in my campus community. And then I think that through my leadership positions, throughout the years from freshman year until now, I got a little more, again, involved in the community, and I just started noticing different things. And then as the 2020 election cycle approached, I just started to get really curious. Because as a political science major, of course, I'm learning and I'm seeing every day and I'm reading the news, all this information about the election. But, when I'm talking to my classmates and talking to my peers and really people outside of my department, I don't see it being talked about enough. So I thought, what is my university doing to inform my peers about what's happening right now? Nobody's talking about it. So really, it just started with a random Google search of, what can I do this election cycle? Like, how can I get people to vote? And I found an organization called Every Vote Counts. And they work with college campuses to institutionalize voting and civic engagement. And through them, I met with people from a lot of different organizations. And then I met with a representative from Campus Vote Project, which is also a similar organization that helps college students institutionalize and do civic engagement work on campus. And then one organization led to another. I had a few fellowship opportunities to really learn and be trained on how to organize. And then it kind of went from there. So that's how it all started. But to the second question of why this work is important to me, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Um, it just is. That's always my answer. I don't think that it's really more complicated than that. Again, as a political science major, of course, I think this way, but I think that even more recently, we've all realized that politics has to do with every single aspect of our lives. And again, we've seen that a lot more in this past year. And I think that I've always really been curious and cared about my community and wondered why certain things weren't changing or certain things weren't being addressed. And I think that we're finally reaching the answer of how we can actually do that. And a lot of it has to do with being civically engaged and voting.
All right. You gave us a lot to think about. It's very exciting to hear about your curiosity leading to action, activism, and we'll get into more in terms of like specific initiatives that you've helped to support and spearhead. So, Janaya, yes, please tell us more. How did you
Well,
become politically active?
right. So for me, as a first year student, as a political science major, I was really eager to find my way of getting politically active on campus, and being a fellow and ambassador of the Andrew Goodman Foundation was a good way of getting me started with that. Um, and also, as far as doing this work, I kind of agree with Christina on what she said. Like, it's just my passion. It's just how I've my mind has operated, how I felt since a young age. I've always wanted to be active in voter engagement and in politics. I've always felt passionate about encouraging my community to vote, also educating them about the system, because I come from a small town and that type of thinking isn't encouraged. It's not really utilized. So that's why I'm very passionate about it.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Elisha.
Hello. My answer kind of echoes the two young ladies who spoke before me. I think I started to get politically active on campus during the Stacey Abrams campaign because I saw for the first time, like being on a college campus because I was a freshman, seeing how looking at government and seeing someone who's running who looks like you, who has your politics, who shares the same passion as you do, really motivates people to get involved. And that way I started using my Instagram account to post polling locations. Like, I started encouraging my friends to vote because at the time I wasn't registered to vote in Georgia, and I didn't find out why until I saw that they didn't have like same day election registration and all of this stuff. And I'm from Florida. So I started to get a little angry because it started to feel a little bit like voter suppression, how some students couldn't vote at the Morehouse polling center, and it just felt like they were doing a lot to make sure that people couldn't vote. So to me, that felt like wrong. And I was like, I want to be a part of the change for that. I want people to get excited about participating in our democratic process and actually having the ability to do that, because Instagram and social media is great and it's a great mobilizer to help other people start to go after things and to participate, but it's bad when they can't do it. And then people lose trust and they lose momentum and they're not as excited. So that's personally why I started to get politically active. And that's why it's important to me as well, because it's really important for the people who are supposed to be represented by our government have the opportunity to get that representation, to be able to participate in those processes that dictate who's going to represent you and how. So that's how I started with the Campus Voter Project, because I saw that it was nonpartisan and they were really involved with like teaching students how to lead student-led movements where it's actually for the students by the students. So that's where I started. But I also echo everything that two ladies said, because yes, it's important because it's important. Like, people are important.
I really, what you all have said has really resonated with me in terms of building off of what Elisha said in terms of many of the organizations or amplify student voices and student activism. And I know for many of you all, you came in with very clear ideas about how you want to make a difference. And you've been very active in contributing to the development of short and long-term action plans and goal setting. So when we let's look retrospectively, and then we'll look prospectively, we'll look toward the future. But looking at coming up with a strategy for this past general election and the runoff election, this was a different kind of political environment in terms of COVID-19 impacted how we organized as a campus. We were 100% remote. And so being able to connect with your peers had to look a little different in terms of realizing our goals, but then also being connected to a larger community, and back home, feeling connected to the nation and wanting to still make a difference and make an impact where you are. How do you think that this political environment shaped your activism and your thoughts about your activism, and leading up to the general election and even to the midterm election, if you were active in getting voters out for the not midterm election, but the Georgia runoff elections? I'll start with Christina.
So for me, I think that even just in the word itself, activism has always been about action. And I always
Mhm.
say, as someone like I'm from West Philly, I've lived there my whole life until I left for college. And I've always said that I feel really privileged to be able to get the education and the experiences that I have. So I've always kind of felt a personal responsibility to take that knowledge and take that experience and, disseminate it and not hoard it. And I think that's really a lot of what informs my activism. But as far as connecting that to our campus community and beyond, I think that the political spectrum of everything that has happened in the last year to 4 years plus, I think that that's made a lot more people feel responsible, because we didn't want to be in a situation where we're again looking back like, what happened? We had a chance to change it. What happened? Why didn't we do anything? So I think that a lot of people felt more personally responsible, but I think that a lot more people started to believe that we could actually make some type of change. And I think that the outcomes that we've seen have really solidified that. And I personally hope that going forward, people don't let that go. They don't let that hope go. They don't let that feeling that they got go. And hopefully we can continue to recreate that.
Awesome. Janaya, what are your thoughts?
I really want to echo what Christina said. She really said a lot of things that I was thinking. I think that what has happened politically, especially in the past elections that have happened, I think that people have understood that just staying silent and sitting back and complaining, and so I think that that has really encouraged people to, you know, stay politically and civically engaged. Yeah.
Yeah, even in spite of the environment, just knowing that this is the moment to actually be
Yeah.
involved really push people to make the most of the moment, even with constraints,
Right.
around moving and where we are. Good point. Good point. What are your thoughts, Elisha?
Um, as always, Christina is like impeccable with her word. I 100% agree with her and Janaya. They really said a lot of what I was thinking. I really just feel like COVID presented a lot of issues because
Mhm.
usually when you're doing civic engagement, when you're trying to do outreach and trying to get people involved, it involves a lot of in-person like events where people are informed and have a good dialogue and there's like an open forum. But COVID presented a lot of difficulties with
Mhm.
that because displacement has caused people to have to pick up jobs to support their
Mhm.
families. Like classes are 100% online, and not everyone does well with online learning. So we were really battling with time, I feel like, for the
Mhm.
majority of the election season. It was really just about time and deadlines and making sure that we can do the most with the time that we have. So I know for Christina and I, when we were working on the runoff election in Georgia this past January, it was like the deadlines just kept coming, and we would like wake up and it was like, oh, registration just ended. Like, oh, this is the election. Oh, this is finishing now. Like it was just happening really fast. So I think one of the things that we did really well was making sure that we utilized our time and actually did important things with that by creating Instagram pages and creating infographics that we could spread, because people are more likely to pay attention if something is pretty with cute lettering. So paying attention to that and making sure that our peers had their passion met with action. Because on social media, there was a lot of people who were calling out their legislators and representatives and asking them to do more, especially like the pandemic was really important to a lot of people, and recognizing how their congressmen and women did not react or did react really had an effect on what they had to say. So using that anger and kind of like funneling it into a way that it can be useful and actually mean something and change something, I thought was really important. So just using our Instagram page, creating that, um, spreading infographics, sharing information on like ride share information for people who needed to use Lyft and Uber, making sure that we were constantly putting out information that had to do with like who the candidates were, and like working with things like that, I felt made a real change for us. Long term, I would say we are trying to set up like a civic engagement center on our campus. That's like our long term goal, to make sure that the work that we do is important, but it also has a good lifespan. So that would be our long term goal.
All right, all right. Did any of you all want to circle back around? Because I think Elisha put a lot on the table, which I think is really good in in terms of talking about some of the strategies, the role of technology as an approach, and being a very effective, efficient, and practical strategy for reaching out. And that's one thing that I was really impressed with, observing just the technological footprint that you all left as a part of this election, in terms of sharing messages, sharing infographics. Infographics were great, sharing high quality information about how to register to vote online. And so in terms of when you think about some of these strategies, these short-term strategies, and even the long-term strategy in terms of building a center, what are some things that coming out of this general election in terms of positive lessons learned or new strategies that you had to employ that may carry over even once we go back to some sense of normalcy of interaction for the next election? I know I didn't tell you this question, but what do you think? What carryovers or what lessons did you learn that you would want to build on as we prepare for a midterm election or the next general election or local elections even? So I'm going to start. I'm going to shake it up a little bit. I'm going to go to Janiyah, and then I'm going to go Elisha, and then Christina.
Well, of course, I'm a first year student, so
Mhm.
my work last year wasn't really on campus. But as far as my experience in my hometown, I think what I learned is that keeping people engaged about what is going on around them, like letting them know what bills are being passed right now, what is on the floor, what lobbyists are talking about, letting them know like as things are happening so they can stay engaged and stay motivated. Because I found that like informing people of things that have already happened is kind of like sometimes discouraging, because they kind of lose their voice in all of that, all of that consuming them. So that's what I learned.
Oh, I like that. Keeping them informed about things that are going to happen and that are currently happening, rather than informing them only of things that have happened. It's excellent, excellent. Okay, okay.
Okay, I think in the order it was me next.
Yes.
So I will say, I think the most important lesson that I learned is that people want to know more. I think sometimes voting and like elections have so much misinformation and propaganda that at some point people start to distrust what they're hearing. And when you provide like clean, honest, real information, I think people really plug into that and hold on to that. And because of that, they feel more comfortable acting and asking questions. Because I think a lot of the times when you see civic engagement or organizations that are trying to get students to sign up for something or like register somewhere. Just students do their digging. Like it is quite literally our job to study and to look into things because we're students. And eventually, when they look into things, like they start to lose trust when they see that organizations are not being upfront, that they're not being honest, that there might be something shady going on, for lack of a better word. So I think when you start to provide people with information that is solely like has the motive of informing them and extending the knowledge that you know to help them be knowledgeable, I think that's when they really start to care. So just making sure that when you're informing people, you're providing them with good information because people will really go with that. Like a lot of the times on social media, when people saw tweets that were solely about, in my experience, like when I was tweeting for the election season about rideshare and how to get to polling centers and what time they close, those were the tweets that went up the most. Not the tweets about candidates, not the tweets about who, where, what, when, how. It was the tweets about polling locations, how to get there, rideshare information, when things are going to close, when things are going to open, how far is it from your like current standpoint, like your current location. Things like that got the most attention. So that really taught me that like people want to know. They want that information. They want to learn. They want to be able to help themselves. And the best way you can help someone is to teach them how to help themselves. And then they'll extend that to others, hopefully. So that was my biggest lesson.
Okay. Christina?
Yeah, I would say the biggest lesson I learned is just you have to meet people where they are. And I think that's what it all boils down to, especially when we talk about kind of the uptick in digital organizing and social media.
Mhm.
I think that everything being remote was a positive and a negative. I think that in some ways it was a little bit harder to reach people because again, most of us are used to, in-person contact and in-person events and in-person tabling and things like that. But I think that on the flip side, everything being remote made people need some type of interaction. And I think that, with all the isolation and not being able to see each other, people were able to find that way to connect and really organize around the election. And I think that was a way to bring a lot of people together. So again, a lot of people were on their phones more, not even just our generation, contrary to popular beliefs. Everyone was on their phones and devices more. So that was an easy way to reach people. And again, like meeting people where they are. If people are on TikTok, go put the voter information on TikTok. Like when you think about it, it just sounds so simple, and we saw that it really worked. But also, not overloading people with information. I learned that as well. Um, I think that in our circle of academia and political science, we tend to overanalyze and overshare, and the terminology that we use a lot of times isn't inviting for people to want to learn more or read more. It kind of turns a lot of people off immediately. But I think that, at least specifically for my generation, it's definitely better to just be quicker and to the point. Like, here's what's happening, here's what you can do, here's why it's important, and if you want to learn more, you can go do that. But like, you got to draw people in, give them what they need, and send them on. So I think just not overloading people with information, but also making it relatable. I think that most people, when you tell them things, their first thought is, why is this important to me? Or how does this affect me? And I think that if you can find a way to frame civic engagement and voting in a way that is important to people specifically, or affects an issue that they care about or some aspect of their personal lives, people are a lot more inclined to learn more, to care more, to take that action.
Okay, thank you so much. I do have, we have a guest here. Yes, I'm calling on you, Dr. Franklin. Uh, Dr. Franklin, Sekou Franklin is the current president of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. So we, we have awesomeness in the house. And so, but I did want to give him an opportunity to ask a question or to interject any comments while he's here in our space.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me. I have a few questions, I guess. Dr. Platt, did you know I wrote a book on Black Youth and Movement Space? Did you know about that?
No.
You maybe didn't know that, yeah. So I wrote, yeah. back in 2014. It's getting outdated, I guess, but that's not a big deal. I was going to ask a question, a couple questions, more on the practical side. Are any of you writing your stories or podcasting your stories, or the networks you're involved in? Are any of you doing that at all?
I don't know if this counts, but I am, my senior thesis research project is going to be exploring how different grassroots organizing efforts impact voter turnout, specifically among Black students at HBCUs and minority serving institutions. I'm not necessarily writing, but I think that it may turn into that at some point. I think that for my postgraduate studies, a lot of my personal statements and things that I reflect on will be about my work with this, if that counts.
Good. I have for the first time ever, I'm having my students do a podcast. I got that idea from Dr. Andrea Benjamin, and I'm having them model. I'm using as inspiration a podcast by some young activists called Resistance that documents people in the streets and folks like that. So, but I was going to ask the question: do you see? Are you reframing electoral work around what some may call, what I have called electoral justice? That is a different kind of electoral organizing that's movements oriented and that may be different from, say, traditional electioneering tactics. How would your organizing work differ from traditional electioneering tactics? How would the language and the vibe differ from, say, for example, a turnout model that the Democratic Party, the mainline Democratic Party may use? Do you have a different kind of turnout model, a GOTV model that's different from what you see a lot of mainline or mainstream electioneering folks do?
I'm going to take a crack at that. My answer is probably going to be pretty general. But I will say, I think that even just the idea of specifically targeting young voters and young voters of color is something that's different from a typical model. I know that we've talked a lot about this in class, that candidates and parties don't normally target young voters, and especially young voters of color, because traditionally we don't turn out, we don't vote, we don't show the numbers, so they don't want to necessarily waste the resources on us. But I think that as my generation is coming of age, we're kind of pushing back on that idea and taking that into our own hands and organizing amongst ourselves. And I think that my generation in general, we are, I don't want to say anti-establishment, but I think that we're very visionary and we're not afraid to do things differently. We're not afraid to push back against old ideas. And if we feel like something new is working, we take that and we run with it. And I also think we're a lot more community-based and community-centered, if that answered your question.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think Christine is being a little modest, because with the AUC votes and with the Campus Vote Project and Andrew Goodman Foundation, during this last election, there was a lot of relational outreach, which we haven't normally seen in terms of the calling banks, the texting banks, the individualized reaching out, and having watch parties and conversations. I mean, they did a lot of diverse but different. That this is my first election ever really seeing this level of innovation on the part of young people to reach each other in versus just setting up a table, the traditional form of setting up a table and sending out information. I think that they did quite a bit. And I remember, they may not know this, but I did check with Rock the Vote to see what some of the turnout was for some of their voter mobilization relational outreach. And on average, they said the Clark Atlanta students and the student organizations at Clark Atlanta who set up these sessions had over 200 students or individuals to register and participate. And each one of those sessions reached more than 2,000 people. And so I don't know if they know the data yet, but I am just going to say that in terms of, as far as I know, Clark Atlanta had 4 of those phone banking outreach, one through with Ignite and one with CAU votes, and then we work with AUC votes, and then there were some, there was just a general one for the Atlanta University Center through AUCC. But Clark Atlanta University students and our team, we led the charge. And to think that we had four, well, we had over 2,000 people connected, because they would look to see what your connections actually were, the quality of the connections, either through phone calls or texting, and what type of information you shared using the app to support that. And so when you think about their impact, it was that's pretty significant. And as I said, I think they're being a little modest in terms of their activism, but they were really, really, really dynamic in the general election, and then remobilizing for the runoffs. So I just want to put a plug in for them, because I know a little bit of data that they may not know about their work.
I have another question if you want me to ask that. Dr. Platt.
Okay, go ahead.
In the 1960, April 1960, a number of Ella Baker and a number of other folks put together the regional conference to bring together students who were part of the sit-in movement in the early part of the year, in which tens of thousands of students poured out in the streets. And the theory was that they needed to have a more formal, not formal necessarily, but a more organized, disciplined framework to attack Jim Crow. And that meeting in April of 1960 produced SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and there were several other formations like that over a number of years, but that was probably the most important. And it united students from Nashville, where I live, the Nashville Fisk and American Baptist College, and it united the Howard Universities and the Nashville Student Association to a framework that ultimately produced SNCC. Do you see an opportunity like that, maybe in Georgia, to unite the Savannah states and the Albany states and the Kennesaw states, or a regional effort like that, given that we've had back-to-back surges of youth-based insurgencies, you might argue, people in the streets in the summer of 2020, and then young people like yourself involved in I call it electoral justice. Do you see an opportunity like that emerging sometime in the next year or so, in which young people can develop a entity like that, or is there or maybe there's not a need for that? But what's your thoughts about something like that? Or are you conversing with people from across the landscape of Georgia, North Carolina, other activists of your age?
I will take a crack at this one. So on our campus, we're actually working for a civic engagement center where we're establishing coalitions with like different organizations on our campus. Potentially, we could spread out to other like organizations in different campuses, because I'm secretary of the Young Democrats on our campus, and Christine is also on the e-board. So we get direct messages on Instagram from members in DeKalb County and like other chapters who are looking to plug into one another and kind of mutually support one another and see what voting looks like on each campus. So I know that that could be something in the near future. As far as there being a need for it, I think, as Christina stated earlier, our generation is kind of anti-institution a little bit, just because there's so much distrust that we have for the systems that we've seen constantly not work in our favor. So I think in terms of mobilizing, the way we mobilize looks a little bit different than it has in the past, because to us, it's about sharing information. It's about plugging whatever we can, resources we can. GoFundMe is like way to support people directly, because supporting institutions have let us down in the past. So I think in kind of a different step, but hopefully to leave the same weight of a footprint, we are kind of just supporting people instead of institutions, instead of centralizing ourselves under one form or one face. We kind of let everyone have their face, because also in the way that people have been like grouped in the past, there have been people who were left out, who were left unheard, who still had their issues, and centralizing doesn't always mean like getting things done. So we have it on a smaller scale in terms of it breaking out to be bigger. I don't think that will happen with us.
I'll actually add a little bit of a counter, but also a little bit of an agreement. I actually do think there is a need for more of an organized movement, but I will say I think more to what Elisha was saying, more so in the spirit of coalition building, not necessarily with one leader or one face, but more so as a group, but still more organized. And I actually think that that could happen. I think that it's kind of budding right now. If I can talk about a few things, there's something called the Student Voting Network, and that is nationwide. And it's just different groups of students like ourselves, fellows through these different civic-minded organizations. And again, we kind of talk through Slack channels and different digital things like that. There's also more local things, like we mentioned earlier, AUC Votes, which is a coalition between all three AUC institutions. And then also on our own campus, CAU Votes, which is a coalition of all the different organizations on our campus. And even through the different organizations that we partner with, a lot of them have organizing spaces or affinity groups for HBCU students, or HBCUs in the South or HBCUs in Georgia. But I think that the real challenge will be kind of bringing them all together again into one organized space or one organized coalition.
I was gonna say that for this conference, NCOBPS, we've had, interestingly enough, a lot of student hub groups coming. The Clark folks, Loyola Marymount brought a group. Well, virtual space, you could do that, I guess. Howard, I think Cal State Northridge, I think Valdosta State, Clark and Atlanta. I'm missing one or two other HBCUs. About 6 or 7 different organizations presenting great research or doing great presentations like yourself.
Awesome. I think that's one of the benefits of this virtual conference, is that it's made it a lot easier for student engagement and student participation. And so it's always great to hear directly from students about your activism and about your engagement, and your perspectives on the political system, because some assumptions and notions that we may have about how you all are understanding and engaging political organizations, political activism, political moments might be a little different in terms of what you're doing and your motivations for doing it versus how we may understand those actions and those activities. One of the things I did want to ask you is, how did the social and political demonstrations and activism in the summer impact your activism leading up into this election? And then how do you think it impacted your peers' engagement? Even though we were in the height of lockdown for COVID-19, many people were motivated to be in the streets in order to demonstrate their dissatisfaction with specific policies, specific actions, and in response to certain political decisions. And so do you think that carried over to impact their vote, to impact voter turnout or voter activism, voter mobilization? What are your thoughts?
Okay. I think that in my experience, it actually helped at my activism, especially mostly with every election season. I really work hard to get people registered to vote, get them to the polls, get them voter information. And it, instead of pulling teeth to, this is why this is important, people were forthcoming this time. And also, even with a lot of people that I know from my hometown who aren't usually really engaged in politics in general, they turned around to even getting out into the streets and protesting and knowing why these types of topics were important. So I think that really sparked the notion that everything is political for a lot of people.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just gonna agree with Janaya. I think that there's like this momentum that comes every single time there's an election where like you see the Instagram posts, you see the tweets, you see the shirts, you know, your friends text you like, hey, did you vote? Like there's always the like measurable like amounts of momentum. But I think this summer and the outrage that was displayed and seeing how certain parties and people just were reacting to really just acts of injustice and finally let people who wanted to mobilize learn how, because out of desperation sometimes comes like really strong passion for things that teach you how to be a part of the things that you want to be a part of, how to be a catalyst for that change, how to mobilize in your neighborhoods. I think I saw that a lot with my peers. A lot of my peers were setting up protests and going and reaching out to their respective grassroots organizations and seeing how they can get involved. Like for a lot of people, it wasn't just topics you discuss in class, it was real life. It wasn't just a discussion you were having where people are playing the devil's advocate. It was real life. There was real video and it was real emotions. It wasn't something you could detach from because it was everywhere. It was on the news. It was in grocery stores. It was such a polarizing time because at that moment, I think there was a clear level of outrage, but there was also a lot of performative activism. There were a lot of people who realized that people were reacting out of what they thought would be a good PR move versus actual compassion and care and really wanting to answer the need of so many people. So I think that affected election season because a lot of people were like, I remember what you did. And I remember what you didn't do. And because of that, I saw a lot of people like for the first time who I had previously seen like say they weren't going to get involved because, you know, disenfranchisement is real. Like people have real reasons not to trust the system. But I saw a lot of people step back from that reasoning and kind of re-examine to see how I can be met where I am and still do something to change where we are as a people. So I guess I would say that's how it affected election season for me personally, because a lot of people took that energy and those emotions and really decided to change it into something that they could see that's tangible, that's real, and that came from their action, especially when we saw how much voter turnout in Georgia changed the whole trajectory of the election. I think that was really like a speak volume moment. So yeah, just for me personally.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Christina.
I was just going to say, for me personally, I think that this time around, it was really like having a new tool in the toolbox. Because the last time, at least in my experience, that I've seen, you know, this type of movement happening nationwide and this type of recognition, I was still in high school. It's 2016, and I couldn't vote at that time. And I think that, you know, I still had all the same feelings, the same anger, the same kind of pent up energy, but I didn't necessarily have an outlet at the time to feel like I was making any real type of change or real type of difference. But I think that this time around, for myself personally and just nationwide, we all felt those same emotions, but I think this time we recognized that we had a new outlet. So to actually make a difference and actually change things. But also something that I mentioned earlier, I think that as a community, we did a lot better job this time with holding ourselves and our friends and our peers and classmates accountable. And I think that a lot more people felt a sort of a sense of personal responsibility. I've said a few times, you know, I saw you at the protest. Will I see you at the polls? And I think that that kind of rang a little different this time because I think a lot of people felt like there was just no excuse. Because again, you have this outlet right here. We've had all these other things that we could do before, but I think that the timing, unfortunately, lined up very well for people to use voting and use civic engagement as an outlet.
Okay. Okay. So let me see. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Franklin.
Well, I was going to ask this question. Do you see, this is maybe an academic question more than it is it's a moving question. How did you reach out to, or did you see any differences or similarities or enthusiasm and reaching out to maybe non-college young people your age? What was the politics like in the organizing, or did that come across, say, for example, a person who's your age who's not in college but maybe working a third shift or fast food? Do you see any? What's your general feeling about the organizing culture of that when it came to, particularly around this campaign of 2020?
I can answer that. I think a lot of the times students who are college age adults are left out of the movement and organizing that happens, because a lot of the outreach happens on college campuses, because that's just one centralized place where you can find people who are old enough to vote. But I do think that the initiative sometimes does leave them out. I think it's not necessarily intentional. I think that it happens as a result of just initiatives always being done on campus. But I think personally, using social media is another way to reach those individuals, because I think that sometimes sending mass emails to students is great and like people see it. But when you post on Instagram and social media, even if you're not in college, chances are you have a Twitter or an Instagram or a Snapchat or some sort of social media platform where you can still see that information, which is why when we were doing activism, we made sure that a lot of our information was being done through social media, because that reaches everyone. There's no filter or monitoring system that leaves them out. I thought that it was really important to make sure that people who are not in college still have the opinions that they have and get to vocalize those opinions, get to be informed, get to have better information, and make sure that they're not being suppressed because they don't have the resources that everyone else does.
All right. Did anybody else want to give some insights?
I would just add what we spoke to about relational organizing. Can everyone still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. About relational organizing, I think that that's something that was really effective that should really continue, because that helps to push beyond just, the college campus sphere. I also actually think that being remote and being virtual helped a lot with that as well, because as Elisha spoke to, things weren't necessarily constricted only to being physically on campus. Yeah, so I just add about relational organizing. And thank you.
All right. So let me see. I'm down to about my last question. How can we sustain this momentum? One of the things that you all highlighted was that the summer provided a unique context for moving forward. The political environment in terms of the partisan, how divisive it was, the partisan language and the actions even behind it just are not what we're seeing now. It's there's been a slight de-escalation to an extent. It's particularly when we think about in public, in media spaces around these issues, which could cause some people to turn away or focus their attentions in other spaces. And then also knowing that we don't have this national election looming on the horizon, but there's so many different opportunities for people to still make a difference at the local level, at the state level, and also in national politics. So how do we sustain the momentum, or is that even the right concept, in terms of sustaining momentum? Maybe there needs to be some ebb and some flow, but not a full dissipation. That it just takes on a different shape or a different current. And so what are your thoughts about that? Because this is something, as we know, many organizations only show up on our campuses or only appear every 4 years and then they disappear, but our lives continue and the issues persist. So, but we know that you all have done so much to reach people. So how do we keep people engaged and involved? And I would love to hear from all of you. So yes, go Elisha, you ready?
Oh, I'm sorry, I clicked it on accident, but I can go first. Okay. My answer would be to listen. I think that this past election season really demanded people to listen to people that they would have overlooked in the past. I think that people want to be heard. If you want them to stay tuned in, make sure that they're a part of the conversation. Treat them like they're adding to it instead of like picking and deciding what type of audiences and what type of people you want to include. I kind of, when I was going through like election season, and yeah, when I was going through election season, it was kind of like I told people that older people who had asked similar questions, that it's like attending a Zoom call, except you don't have a unmute button. It's like you have to watch everybody, you have to hear everybody, you have to listen to everybody's hot take on everything that's going on, but you don't get to participate. And because of that, people leave the call early. They don't wait, they don't participate. There's no chat. There's nothing they can do unless they all start doing something with the camera, which is what I think we saw summer 2020. People started using the attention that they were getting to be heard. And even when people weren't looking, they were forced to look because, you know, violence is the language of those who are going unheard. So I think when you have that, I think that's the perfect description for what happened. You know, you demand to be heard. People have to listen. If you want people to keep momentum, if you want them to keep their eyes on the issues, then you have to listen to them when they talk about them. Treat young people as if they're adding to the conversation, because I think oftentimes when we talk about reaching the youth, there's like this thing of like us being naive, almost as if we don't know enough to add to the conversation. And I think that that causes people not to pay attention, that causes people not to listen because they don't feel heard. And I think by doing that and ensuring that people are being heard and that what they're saying is being taken into account and their feelings and their emotions are being validated, instead of treating them like they're acting out of what they're supposed to be doing and acting out of what is expected of them. I think that's what makes people listen. That's what makes people feel heard. So yeah, just listen and be intentional, be an active listener. Teachers love to say that. I think they should try it.
Good point. So, yes, I'm looking at you, Janaya.
I really want to echo what Elisha said, because it's really centered, her thoughts are really centered around what I think that we can continue to listen and continue to just be a vessel and help people understand ways that they can stay engaged. Yeah, I really just agree with what Elisha said, truthfully. It was
Love
beautifully
it.
said.
+1. All right, Christina.
+2, I'll also agree. But I'll add as well, kind of the same thing, but just not to let the noise die down. And I think that a big part of that is just the education. Mainly, I think that we really need to educate ourselves as a community on what government is responsible for and what we can actually get from it. Because we all talk about, we've been talking a lot lately about, you know, holding elected officials accountable and, you know, all that. But I think that we need to add to that conversation, what are we holding them accountable for? What's realistic? What's not realistic? What timeline is realistic? Because I think that even just lately on social media, even for example with the stimulus package and the stimulus checks, I've seen a lot of conversation about it was supposed to be this amount or it was supposed to come at this time and why isn't this person doing their job? But I think that we need to be intentional about realizing who has what job, what can we actually expect, what ways can we actually get the things that we want, being intentional about deciding what do we actually want. Just things like that. I think we need to get more organized. And I think that, again, to Elisha's point of just listening to each other and going back to meeting people where they are, talk to people about what's important to them, talk to them about how they get that and who they hold accountable.
Awesome. Thank you so much. What I will say, working with you all if you can believe it, it's almost been a year, working with you all for about a year in terms of getting these ideas moving forward. And Christina sent me a message saying, hey, Dr. Platt, there's this conference, you need to go. The Georgia voter, what was it, Christina? The Georgia voter organizing or student organizing. I know she sends me a lot of stuff. And so, so I went to the conference, and there were opportunities for us to start, for me to assist in amplifying student voices. And one of the things I will say is that by listening to you all and understanding that it's important for students to lead the charge in connecting with other students, for you to help shape and mold the vision of what engagement looks like for your cohort and beyond, is critical. And so it's not about passing a baton, but it's more about working together, that you all have legitimate concerns and legitimate perspectives, and that I can have a role in helping to cut red tape, cutting policy, smoothing the way, so that you can be more effective in realizing your goals and your objectives, because it was very clear that you all have goals and very clear that you have objectives. And this has just been very rewarding work of seeing you all train others, motivate others to take leadership roles through your activism, through you modeling what student leadership can look like, what cross-curricular partnerships can look like with students working with faculty and administrators. Because as I said, this is really student-led. A lot of what's going on at CAU has come from you all. And so, but now we're working toward institutionalizing it, because I do want you to graduate in 4 years and go on and change the world in other ways. And so, so how do we keep this together? And what I really appreciate is that you all have been thinking about that from the beginning. You've documented your action plans. We're scored in the above the median and the upper percent out of, I think we were in the 90 percentile of 256 colleges and universities. And so you all have done amazing work in thinking about being intentional about outreach. And so I just want you to stay encouraged and know that I take being a faculty champion for you all seriously, in terms of just really supporting what you're trying to do, because you are doing excellent work. You're taking the information from the classroom, making it practical and applicable for your peers at CAU and the AUC and the community at large. So just stay excellent, and stay awesome, and keep checking your emails, because there are more opportunities for us to really do more good work together. So thank you guys so much. Thank you, ladies. So much. So did you have any additional words, Dr. Franklin, or in student presenters?
I just really celebrate their leadership and the great work that y'all are doing, and our feet, laying the groundwork and building out leadership, and the work that Dr. Platt's doing at Clark Atlanta University, and for saving the United States from doom by winning Georgia.
You know what? I have told people, I said it's the activism of our students, because when I look at how many people that were actually registered to vote, that is the difference. When I look at our impact, our footprint is equivalent to the difference of what Georgia provided or needed in order to push it over. And so I just really believe our students, and our students saved Georgia. And so and I'm just really proud that they were in the fight, and part of the organizational efforts early, in the middle, at the end, even now. And so yeah, I look forward to taking them to the next NCOBPS, because as I say, this is just going to be awesome. Just to report on how we've been able to build this out even further. I'm just really excited about the evolution of this, and